everyone. Welcome to the October 28th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, and this week we're looking ahead to Saturday's stakes action at Santa Anita. We're going to lose our East Coast bias for a minute and take a look at some of the races out west this weekend. It's an all-stakes pick 5 in the late pick 5 sequence at Santa Anita, so some nice races worth discussing. We've got a couple of state-bred stakes races for the 2-year-olds, as well as 3 turf stakes races that came up with pretty interesting fields. Some clear favorites in a couple of them, but I think there are some races where you can spread a little bit, find some long shots to take a shot against those favorites with. So, Craig, I found this sequence to be enjoyable to handicap and overall pretty manageable.
That's what I like about it. I think it is manageable. It has some big fields, some fields not so big. And I think there's some favorites that look strong and some that don't look so strong. So I think it's a good betting sequence. It's not one you're going to have to spend a ton of money to feel comfortable on, and one I enjoyed handicapping as well.
Yeah, we've got 2 graded stakes as part of this sequence. They're running 3 in total on Saturday at Santa Anita. The Twilight Derby for the 3-year-olds on the turf and the Grade 3 Autumn Mist. Those are the 2 graded stakes that are part of this Pick 5 sequence. We'll get to them in just a bit, but we're going to start things off with the 6th race, which kicks off the late Pick 5. This one is the Golden State Juvenile Fillies. It is a 7-furlong test for the Cal-bred 2-year-old fillies. We've got a field of 6 signed on. I think originally 7 were drawn, but 1 has already been scratched early. And Craig, this one feels more wide open than the other 2-year-old race we're going to talk about a little bit later. I suppose the horse to beat is the number 2, Chismosa, who is 3 for 3 in her career. She's not exactly running speed figures that make her a standout, but she does just keep winning.
It's funny you say that. This is one of the races I struggled with the most to have any real opinions, despite being a 6-horse field and having an undefeated 3 for 3 favorite. But like you said, it's not like she's been all that fast. She hasn't run the best speed figures. And I actually think there's a lot of directions you can go in this race.
Yeah, I went back and watched all 3 of Chismosa's prior starts, and she's kind of an interesting filly to watch run because she doesn't break that sharply. That's why she's shown pretty far back in the first call of all of her races. But after that slow break, she usually gets pretty aggressive, and it's just up to the rider to kind of steer her in the right path to make this big middle move on the far turn, which usually takes her to the front end by the time they get to the quarter pole. And from there, she just hasn't been able to be caught in her last couple of starts. She did tire a little bit in the late stages last time when they stretched out to 6 furlongs, but I would note the horse that was chasing her down at the end of that race, Uncontrollable, she came back to finish second at a big price in the Grade 1 Chandelier in her next start at Santa Anita on the stretch out. So maybe she was getting run down by a good one last time, so I don't want to put, make too much of that. I am a little bit concerned, though, given that running style and that aggressive nature about her stretching out to 7 furlongs here, because you can't make that big middle move with half a mile to go at 7 furlongs and expect to hang on at the end.
That's my thoughts exactly. I'm a little skeptical of her at the 7 furlong distance, and particularly when she doesn't really have the speed figures that make her look like the clear-cut winner to me. So I'm going to lean in some different directions. A couple of the horses I looked at were Big Celebration, a horse who had a powerful maiden win last time after a so-so debut when she lost to a horse that's also in this field, Cast Member. I'm interested in both of those. They've even though Cast Member doesn't have the speed figure, I'm a little leery of that speed figure, to be honest. Those are always the toughest ones when they're for lately raced 2-year-olds. We've already seen Big Celebration come back and run a bigger figure, so I don't want to just assume Big Celebration has passed that horse already when Cast Member was able to beat her so easily. So they would be the 2 main ones I'm going to play. One I'm going to be against is the 6-horse Sell the Dream, a horse who just didn't really seem to handle dirt very well first time out. It's not so much that she ran okay when you look. Her speed figure was just a 69. But what caught my eye was she just didn't really have a lot of early speed going 5.5. So I'm going to be a bit against her of the shorter priced horses.
We pretty much agree in this race. Sell the Dream also seemed like the one to fade in here. I mean, she's got the best races of anybody, really, and the best class lines for sure, coming out of those tougher turf stakes. But just watching her run, she feels like more of a turf horse, and I agree about her dirt race. It just didn't seem like she was getting over the main track as well as you would have liked when she was beaten pretty resoundingly by Chismosa in that start. So we're on the same page here. I think the two best alternatives are the number 4 Big Celebration and the number 7 Cast Member. I have minor concerns about each one, Craig. Big Celebration did earn her big speed figure at Los Alamitos last time, and I know we've talked about this when we've handicapped California in the past. Can't always trust those inflated numbers from Los Alamitos if they don't really stack up with the horse's prior form. This is an improving filly, so maybe she's just took that natural step forward second time out, but that is one reservation that I have. And then with Cast Member, obviously she has upside, just the second start of her career, and I like the visual of her debut. I wonder if she's going to be better on turf down the line, because she does have more of a turf pedigree on the bottom side, though she is a daughter of Munnings, who was a great versatility influence. But they did seem like the right two to use in tandem with Chismosa. It's not like I'm going to throw Chismosa off my tickets. I just didn't want to lean on her in this first leg.
Same, and I'm actually going to use more as a seahorse is Fun Money, a horse who actually won on the turf last time. But unlike Sell the Dream, I don't think she's a horse who totally hates the dirt. She's run some good races on it before. And to me, it seems like that jump last time could have been just as much her natural progression as a young 2-year-old as it is the switch and surface. She probably did like the turf a little bit more, but I suspect she's a horse who's going to sit off the pace and come running late, and maybe she'll like the 7 furlongs. So as a horse who I believe is the second longest shot in the field, I didn't want to totally leave her out.
I'm actually glad you brought up Fun Money, because when I was going back to watch all of Chismosa's starts, I noticed in her debut, which was Fun Money's third start, there's no doubt Fun Money was the better horse that day. She had a crazy trip in that race, but subsequently she hasn't really improved on that, and her best race did come on the turf. But just based on the evidence of that one start 4 races back for Fun Money, I think she's got it in her to be competitive here. And like you said, she'll be a big price, so I agree. She's one that I could also throw in my tickets as some sort of backup. Let's move on to the next race in this sequence, over to the turf course, the Grade 2 Twilight Derby, going 1.125 miles for the 3-year-olds on the grass at Santa Anita. And Craig, I found this one to also be a fairly competitive race. Kind of hard to separate the main contenders, though I agree with the morning line here that the horse to beat is probably the number 9, War at Sea. We had handicapped that Del Mar Derby day when we, I think, had last done a Santa Anita card, or maybe I think we did one since then, but I believe that was the Pacific Classic day that Flightline ran. And I know we were both not really sure what to expect from War at Sea coming off the layoff that day. I think we both gave him a look in that race. He ultimately finished third to slow down Andy, but that was a decent return from the layoff for him, and he's certainly a horse that has prior races at Santa Anita that will make him tough here. So I think he's a horse that certainly makes sense in this spot.
It makes sense. I'm a little worried about the pace, and when I went back and watched that Del Mar Derby, it's not like he had a tough trip. I thought he had a pretty easy trip. He did well to hold on for third. He ran fine, and I would suspect he could improve some in his second start off of what was just a short layoff. I don't even know if 90 days counts as a layoff anymore in horse racing. It's more like the standard, but he ran okay. I'm not thrilled with him. I won't be shocked if he wins. The horse that's really intriguing for me is the horse just to his inside, Speaking Scout, a horse who's shipping in from the East Coast mainly, even though he ran at Hawthorne last time in the Hawthorne Derby. And he's a horse who, speed figure-wise, is a really tough call because he got a big pace upgrade last time, all the way up to a 114. He did finish that race off really fast, and I don't think it was a fluke. It's a horse who took a big jump as a 3-year-old, and for me, I'm going to trust the speed figure and make Speaking Scout my top pick. He wasn't beating a lot that day, but we've talked about it often in that the West Coast Turf Division just has not been very strong. I always look for shippers coming in, and we get one here, and I think a horse is coming in good form. I just really liked how he sat off that slow pace and exploded home, and personally, I think he is the one to beat.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what to do with him in this spot. I agree. He did come home very impressively in that last race. He did get an absolutely perfect trip, though. It's not like he was way back behind that slow pace. He was just sitting on the rail right in behind the leader, following him around the track, and that one drifted off the rail a little bit in upper stretch, and this horse just had everything break perfectly for him to come through on the inside and finish off that race to win impressively. I would say last time was probably the time you wanted to have him, because I was looking through that field and I don't know how he went off at 9-2 in there. That's a red board, but I mean, just he could be an even shorter price in this race, and he's stepping up into a much tougher spot. So I'm not really sure what to do with him. I do put credence in that fast closing time from Hawthorne, though it seems like something so odd is going on with the posted fractions. I don't think he ran his final eighth in 12 and change, and the quarter prior to that in 21 and change. There's definitely some sort of timing error there, but it did seem visually like a slow pace, and he came home pretty fast into it. So I was probably somewhat against him if he is going to be close to that morning line price 3-1. That seems a little light to me on this horse. Looking at some others here, Craig, the one that I'd probably lean towards making my top pick is the number 5, Cabo Spirit, because when I went back to watch that Del Mar Derby, I know that he finished just over a length behind War at Sea, but I thought he undoubtedly had the tougher trip. He was farther back in the early going. That was a race that was dominated on the front end. Slow Down Andy, we had talked about it when we handicapped that race. He looked like the lone speed, and he was able to wire that field at a decent price. And Cabo Spirit, he swung about 5 wide on the far turn, that typical Joe Bravo slingshot move, and it just didn't work out, especially at Del Mar. He lost so much ground coming into the stretch, but still finished up pretty well to run past half the field at the end. And this horse has plenty of back races that put him right in the mix. He'll be a better price than War at Sea, so I like Cabo Spirit in here, and he'd be the one that I would want to lean on most heavily.
I also like him more than War at Sea for all the reasons you mentioned, so I won't dwell on him. He's run the good back races, and I do think he had an excuse last time. One more horse I want to use on my tickets is the 2 Gojo 1. He's a horse who won that shared belief at Del Mar, beating a couple of Bob Baffert horses in behind him, was very game. And the thing that intrigues me, though he's never been on turf, I mean, it looks like he could handle turf. I'll leave that to you a little bit more based on his breeding, but he's also a horse who figures to be clear all by himself on the front end, and that's just always dangerous in these turf races. If somebody doesn't go out him, we saw it with Slow Down Andy. These horses are just able to finish it off. So a horse that's going to be a big price, and most likely, if he handles the surface, have the lead all to himself. I don't want to dismiss Gojo 1.
He's not my kind of first-time turf horse. I just don't see the pedigree there. Protonico, we don't have a whole lot of data on Protonico as a sire, but he hasn't had that many that much turf success. And on the dam side, while it is a more than ready dam, there's really not a whole lot of turf there. So I don't know. I mean, I guess they're taking a shot, but he's not the kind of horse that I would want first-time turf. The one other horse at a big price that I would consider throwing into the mix is the number 6, Stay in Kotai. His U.S. debut was really impressive. He got a great trip that day, but I liked the way he finished off that race, closing down Handy Dandy, who is just kind of this consistent horse who's always right there at the end. He's also in here. And then last time out, when he finished behind Cabo Spirit, it was just kind of got a weird trip in between and behind horses the entire way, and it looked like he almost lost interest in the race and never finished it off. He was also coming back on 2 weeks rest, and we haven't seen him now in 2.5 months, so maybe something happened that day. And if he can bounce back to his U.S. debut effort, I think he's got a shot in here. So again, I don't like him quite as much as Cabo Spirit, but he'll be a much bigger price, so he's one that I'd want to include on my tickets. Move on to the 8th race, the middle leg of this late pick 5 sequence. And again, we've got Calbred 2-year-olds in action here. This is the Golden State Juvenile, this one for the 2-year-old males, going that same 7 furlong distance. And Craig, this seems like a spot where a lot of people will be leaning on a favorite, and I'm probably going to fall into that category as well, because the number 4, Giver Not a Taker, just seems like he has a huge speed figure edge over this field if you isolate his dirt races, and it's just really hard to latch onto anybody else in this field as the alternative.
I agree with you in this spot, and he obviously ran on the turf last time. They jumped him up into Graded Stakes Company going long on the turf, and I looked at the Timeform US breeding rating, something I'm not a big user of. I usually prefer to go in the formulator and just to pass on to people. We are actually working to try to get those better than what they are now, but you don't see too many as clear cut as what you see with Giver Not a Taker. He's just bred to be a sprinter. He's not bred to route. He's not bred to turf. So I have no problem giving him a pass for that last race. And the race 2 back where he ran a 99 just absolutely towers over this field. So it would be tough for me to make a case for any other horse. If I was going to use one other one, it would be the 3-horse Mystic Flyer, just based on watching the replay of his maiden win, a win where he beat another horse who will probably take some money in here, Golf Drama. And he got the kind of trip I just don't like for my horses to get. He was inside or he was in between horses in a 3-horse speed duel. Then he moved to the rail when one of the horses backed out. He got passed by a horse on the outside, came back on. So I thought he was really game, and I don't want to totally dismiss him, but it's a pretty big gap back to the speed figure wise to Giver Not a Taker. So he would just be more like a backup for me.
Yeah, going back and watching his races, I actually liked Mystic Flyer's debut more than his last race. Even though he finished 11 lengths behind Giver Not a Taker, he got off to just a disastrous start that day and actually did some running to get up for fourth. Probably had to work a little harder last time, but did get the victory. He just has to run a whole lot faster if he's going to upset a horse like Giver Not a Taker. I tried to make a case for the number 5, Ship and Scam, who is another one of these Doug O'Neill, Redham long shots. He's a maiden coming into this race. It's just, while he did some late running last time behind Mystic Flyer, I'm not sure that those maiden fields against the Calabreds that he's been running in are that strong, so I couldn't quite get there with him. And I guess the horse that a lot of people might look to as the main alternative, Craig, is the number 2, Passarondo, but he's got to translate his synthetic form from Northern California down to Southern California, and that's easier said than done.
It is, and I went back and watched this race from Pleasanton on the dirt, and similar to the filly we talked about, I just didn't like how he was handling that dirt. Now, I'll admit I don't know a whole lot about Pleasanton and how much different it might be than a track like Santa Anita, but I know it's usually pretty quick, so I would imagine it's not that much different, and he just seemed like a different horse on dirt, so he wasn't for me.
And I'll also add, his trainer, Steve Specht, who has been winning at a very high rate this year, who primarily races in Northern California. I was looking it up in Formulator. His record on the Southern California circuit over the past 5 years, 0 for 22, with just 4 finishing in the money. So doesn't have a whole lot of success with these types of horses. So definitely not the alternative for me. And it just is another reason that kind of solidifies Giver Not a Taker as way the horse to beat in this race. And I think Craig and I are both going to be leaning on him here.
Yeah, I did want to ask, what did you think of Golf Drama? It was hard for me to get past that he couldn't handle Mystic Flyer with a better trip. Even though he came back with a nice win and an improved speed figure, I just think things are going to be a lot tougher here.
Yeah, I mean, that race behind Mystic Flyer, I guess, was one of the worst of his career. But that said, he came back and improved at Los Al last time. I looked up that field. There wasn't a whole lot in there. He was visually impressive. It was first-time blinkers, and he showed some improved early speed. I'm just a little skeptical that form is totally reliable, and I think he'd have to improve again to beat the favorite. So he was not the alternative for me. Let's move on to the 9th race, back over to the turf course for this late double at Santa Anita, which closes out the pick 5 sequence. The Senator Ken Maddie Stakes is going 6.5 furlongs down the hillside course. And Craig, we've got a horse in here that is probably going to take a lot of money. One that has been pretty reliable ever since she got on the turf. That is the number 3, Connie Swingle. We talked about her back in early October, the last time we handicapped a sequence from Santa Anita. Both took some shots against her that day, and I think we had some decent ideas, but she was able to get the job done as the 6-5 favorite. And this is just a filly that knows how to win races. She's got experience down the hill, and she'll be tough here, but it's, again, not the easiest spot for her.
I agree. She's 4 for 4 on the turf. I think it's 3 for 3 down the hill. The one race that looked the toughest, I think 5 furlongs might just be a little bit short for her, but she beat Legs Galore, who's a very fast horse. So I have no knocks on Connie Swingle other than the price. I couldn't even blame somebody if they want to single her. But I'm not going to go too deep in this field, but I don't want to totally dismiss Amy C, who's drawn outside. A horse who's also won going down the hill, has run similar speed figures. Not quite as good as the last one Connie Swingle won, but the full body of work, they're not all that far apart. I think she gets a better post here. She gets a better turf rider for sure in Umberto Rispoli. And she's probably going to be double the price, maybe 3 times the price. So I would probably actually make her my top pick in here, as I don't think the disparity's as big as the odds will make it look.
Yeah, I liked her turf sprint too back when she tried the downhill course going the 6.5. That was a weaker field, and she was justifiably bet down to even money that day, but I mean, she won that race pretty comfortably in the end. Last time out, when she went back to the mile at Del Mar, that was a race that featured just a wicked early pace. The runner-up, who actually was setting that pace and held on for second, ran huge there and came back to win off that race, but it was a pace that was falling apart, so I don't want to be too hard on her for fading that day, and I think cutting back in distance, it makes a lot of sense for her. The pace situation of this race, Craig, I found a little confusing because Connie Swingle obviously wants to be forward, though she's not a need the lead type, and there really isn't anybody in here who needs the lead, so I kind of agree with the pace projector that it's a little murky. I mean, it's not a fast-paced situation, but it seems like there are a few that could be sharing the front end in here, and it remains to be seen how fast they're going to go. But I guess the good thing about Amy C is she doesn't need to be that far off it either.
Right, there is definitely some other speed in here in the 7. She's So Nice, the 2 Lexington Humor. And I do worry a little for Connie Swingle. I mean, it's proven that the outside posts are better than the inside posts going 6.5. It doesn't mean being inside is a death sentence, but I just have a feeling she's going to tuck in behind those speeds and get the rail, and maybe Amy C could get first run on her. I'm probably just going to use those 2. I couldn't really make any case for any of the others in here, and I don't want to get too crazy on the ticket after having spread in the first leg a little bit and not really having any singles in here, but I just don't want to hand the race to her, as I said, and I think Amy C is a logical alternative.
I've got a couple other ideas in this race, and this is actually one of the legs where I want to spread a little bit more, because I don't think Connie Swingle has to win, and I feel like she's going to be heavily used on a lot of tickets. I like 2 horses that are double digits on the morning line that I think are pretty interesting. One of those is the number 6, Royal Address. I don't see how she goes on with 15-1 here, personally, because I just think her form makes a lot more sense than that. But her last race, I know it was a regression off the layoff, but if you go back and watch it, she never had a chance. I mean, she was a little far back early, was in this really awkward spot between horses, got checked back. The rider tried to split horses at the top of the stretch. The split never opened up. He had to alter course, and the race was just basically over from there. I know she finished far behind Connie Swingle, but she just did not have a fair chance that day. And you go back to the winter and early spring, and she was running some nice races down the hill. I don't know if those were the toughest fields, though she did finish behind Legs Galore 2 back, and she's arguably the equal of Connie Swingle on ability, and she faced a slow pace prior to that. She's a pretty nice turf sprinter, and even if you go all the way back to the end of last year when Neil Drysdale ran her at Naira once, she was a good second behind Too Sexy, who was in great form at that time. This horse has some races in her that put her in the mix here, and feels like she could get a little bit ignored off that poor performance last time. And the other horse that I would make a case for is a horse in a similar situation, the number 10, Aqua Seafoam Shame. She's another who's coming out of that race where she was beaten by Connie Swingle last time, but like Royal Address, she was coming off a layoff that day, actually an even longer layoff because she hadn't run since the end of last year, also making her first start for a new barn. But I thought she ran pretty well. She was in mid-pack early, kind of was not that aggressively ridden on the turn, but once he really set her down an upper stretch, she was finishing well to get up for third. She's another one who has positive experience going the 6.5 down the hill, or I should say the 6.5 at Santa Anita. I think her win was not down the hill, but she's just a horse that has some back races that make her somewhat interesting, and she's another that feels like she could get a little bit lost on the board. So I would primarily want to use the 3, 6, 9, and 10 here, and maybe even press those long shots a little bit, because I think that they have better chances than their odds, at least on the morning line, suggest.
All right, you sold me on the 6 Royal Address. I'll have to watch the 10 again.
Let's move on to the last leg of this sequence, the Grade 3 Autumn Miss. Large field signed on for this one, Craig. The 3-year-old filly is going a mile on the turf, but I guess we're going to have a substantial favorite in here in the number 10 Cairo Memories. I guess that's not the easiest post position for her going the mile distance, but she does have a speed figure edge over this field coming back to the West Coast after running in some tough spots, or I should say coming back to the West Coast too last time after running in a tough spot at Belmont Park earlier in the year when she was a decent 5th in that Belmont Oaks behind McCulloch and the very talented Godolphin filly with the Moonlight. When she came back to California last time, she was involved in a pretty honest pace in that Del Mar Oaks and obviously was never going to be any threat to arguably the best 3-year-old filly in the country on the turf, Spenderella. So this is just maybe the right kind of class relief for her, but I didn't view her as the kind of horse that had to win this race.
No, I'm of the same notion. I mean, there is a lot going for her. The drop in class, the turn back to a mile. I'm not sure 1.25 miles and 1.125 miles are her best, even though she has a couple wins at 9 furlongs. Those were early in the 3-year-old season. I think ultimately she'll prove to be better at shorter. But as you say, this is a tough post position. So I wanted to use some others in here as well. A couple I looked at, I started with the one they did, a horse who's shipping in from Europe first time for Neil Drysdale. But when I looked up her stats or his stats in Formulator with foreign shippers, it's not really for me. He's 1 for 16 in Southern California. The one winner was Alexandra, a filly so good she went on to win the Jaipur against the boys. And I don't think this horse is any Alexandra, so she wasn't for me. Another one I looked at was Rhea Moon, just mainly because it's Phil D'Amato, but also came out of a nice winning easy with a 107 speed figure. But that's still a little bit too big of a gap for me to trust her too much. So a horse that intrigued me, and I think I might have liked this horse the last time we talked about this when we handicapped the race out west, is the 2-horse Tezzeret. And I went back and watched. He just had a really tough trip down the hill last time. I think that might have been the day I actually liked her. Didn't work out for her all that well. She was in that same race with Cairo Memories and actually wasn't very far behind her, just the neck. And I just like the post position switch. She's a horse who I think has some dirtied up form. And she's one that's going to be my top pick.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, she was a good idea by you last time, and she had a bit of a rough trip. And actually, both of our picks ran pretty well in that race, just could not quite catch Connie Swingle, who did get the job done as the favorite there. And I agree, Tezzeret ran fine when she was in against Cairo Memories 2 back in that Del Mar Oaks. She was a huge price that day, but she only finished a neck behind her. Cairo Memories was involved in that quick pace, whereas Tezzeret was just kind of sitting back in mid-pack and picking up the pieces. But once again, she's going to be a much bigger price than the favorite, so I can't really blame you for that opinion. I wouldn't be so dismissive of that rail horse, the number 1 Nadette. I also looked up Neil Drysdale's stats, but I don't know if it matters, Craig, because I question how long this horse has even been in Neil Drysdale's barn. I get the sense that this is a horse that's actually been trained in Europe up until maybe this week, because she has no workouts showing in Southern California. And this is probably this horse has been owned by Team Valor all along. And I assume this is a horse that they just sent over from Europe for this race, and maybe she'll stay with Neil Drysdale through the winter to keep racing. But I'm guessing Neil Drysdale's not the one who prepared her for this race. And when I go back and watch and look up some of the fields from her races from Europe, She fits really well in here. I know she never had a chance in that Prix de Diane, the Group 1 back in June. I mean, but she was facing horses that are going to be major contenders in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf that day. Since then, she's been in a couple of Group 3s and has certainly held her own. The winner of the race 2 back, Oscula, she's like 6 for 20 in her career, a multiple Group 3 winner. She's a really solid filly. Also faced Olders last time and held her own there. Her time form ratings, they stack up well against this field as it is, and typically I upgrade the time form ratings a little bit for 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds when they're coming over from Europe to race in this country. So I think she makes a lot of sense here. And, we talk about how sometimes this Southern California turf division isn't that strong. A lot of the horses in this race are coming out of maiden victories, coming out of N1X allowance victories. And this is a horse who has faced real turf horses in France. And I think she makes a whole lot of sense on class. And I don't know if she's going to be as high as 6-1 in here, especially with a great turf rider like Umberto Rispoli getting the mount. But I think she's just as likely to win as Cairo Memory. So if she's anywhere near that price, I'm all in on her.
All right, well, you've sold me on a second horse today. Because, I didn't realize that she has not really been in his barn, making that stat kind of useless. So, for me in this race, I would probably use 3 then, Nadette, Tezzeret, and I'm not totally dismissing Cairo Memories. That it's one where I still think she has a strong shot to win, just not a big fan of the price. So 3 for me in here. Any others catch your fancy? Because I couldn't come up with one.
No, I mean, it's a 12-horse field, which I guess tempts you to want to spread a little bit, but I'd resist that temptation because I think you can really narrow it down. In the 2 horses that I want to use in this race, the Nadette and Cairo Memories, I think both of them bring a lot of quality, and I can't say that about anybody else in this field. I respect your opinion on Tezzeret, and she'd be my 3rd pick in here. I just wasn't quite as confident as you, but she's going to be a price, so I mean, I'm not going to talk anybody off of her for sure. There's just nobody else that really interests me, and I think the second choice on the morning line is the number 3, Pammy's Ready, who I don't like at all. She's much more of a turf sprinter, and the others just are hard for me to make. So this is a spot, despite the large field, where I want to go pretty thin.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to mention, even though we don't have this listed as a fast-paced race, I do think there's some real pace in here. I didn't do the math, but it had to be pretty borderline. Both the 3 and the 4 that we show on the pace projector up near the front end are horses who have sprint speed. They're not necessarily routers. Granted, the 4 horse has run in routes the last time and led pretty easily. So I do think there's going to be some pace, and I wonder how much trouble that'll be for a horse like Cairo Memories from the outside.
Well, correct. We've gone through all 5 legs of this Pick 5 sequence. Let's do a brief recap. I'll throw it over to you first, and I think we're going to have pretty similar ticket structure, but maybe just using a few different horses along the way.
Yeah, the first leg I'm going to spread a bit. Chismosa, I understand being the favorite. Little bit short for me. I would still use her, but I'd also use Cast Member, Big Celebration, and Fun Money, a horse who I think can handle the dirt, and as you pointed out, ran pretty good in that maiden race against Chismosa. In the Twilight, let's see here. Speaking Scout was the horse coming out of that Hawthorne Derby that I liked. I also want to give to the 2 Gojo 1. I think he's dangerous as the lone speed. They would be my main plays in that race. In the juvenile dirt, I think it's pretty tough to get past the favorite in here, Giver Not a Taker, the 4 horse. I'm not going to try to beat him. I might use a little bit Mystic Flyer, who I just thought was really game in his win. Won't probably have that same trip, maybe come from off of it a little bit. So looked okay to me. In the 9th, I'm not going very deep in this one at all. Connie Swingle, I think you do have to use her. I prefer Amy C, the 9 horse on the outside, trying the hill again. And then in the last, we just talked about it. I'm going to spread a little bit. You talked me into Nadette. Tezzeret's another one that I will use. And I don't want to completely rule out the favorite in Cairo Memories either.
Yeah, we're pretty similar, especially in that first leg. We like the same horses to take a shot against Chismosa with. I'd use pretty much all 3 in equal strength, the 2, 4, and 7. In the 7th race, the Twilight Derby, Greg and I differ a little bit here. I mean, I would lean most heavily on the 5, Cabo Spirit. I think he is the most likely winner of the race, with War at Sea being a close second in that department. And the one price horse I'd want to use there is the number 6, Stay in Kotai. But I don't think he's quite as likely. I mean, he'd be more of a B or C type for me, as I would want to have more of my play going through the number 5 in there. In the 8th race, Craig and I agree. It's just hard to go against Giver Not a Taker, and I have enough price opinions in other legs that I'll swallow this short price and not try to overcomplicate things in this middle leg. In the 9th race, I would try to spread a little bit here, beating Connie Swingle. I'm using Connie Swingle, but I think Amy C is almost as likely to win as she is, and the number 6 Royal Address is the long shot that really interests me. She would certainly be an A for me. The 10 Aqua Seafoam Shame is another one that I think could be a decent price here that I'll make a case for. She is probably more of a B type, but they're both prices that I would want to have in the mix there. So I would want most of my play to be going through 4 horses, the 3, 6, 9, and 10 in the 9th race. And then closing things out, I'm just going too deep using the number 1 Nadet, who would be my top pick, and is a horse that is a definite A for me, and the number 10 Cairo Memories. I hate to use the term, that triggering term, using favorites defensively, but it's just hard to go too deep in this race, and of course she can win it. If I'm right about my long shot in the prior race, I'm not going to get knocked out by Cairo Memories, who just makes a whole lot of sense in this finale, but at a likely better price, I do prefer the number 1 Nadet in that last leg.
Right, I can't imagine that. When I first started out playing these vertical or horizontal bets, times I would try to totally go against a favorite, and it makes no sense to throw out a favorite who you think's got a good chance to win if you have spread in some of the other legs. I did want to mention a couple other horses. Cabo Spirit, I forgot to mention. He will definitely be on my tickets. I mean, he's an A. I think he's the most likely winner. And you did talk me into Royal Address as well.
Well, everybody, that wraps up our look at this Pick 5 sequence at Santa Anita on Saturday. I'll just mention, coming up next week, Craig and I will just be doing one podcast. Craig, I just finally responded to the email you sent me yesterday. Sorry, things got away from me a little bit, but we'll, on either Monday or Tuesday, Craig and I are going to record a Breeders' Cup focus podcast, and there's a lot to get through, Craig. I think we'll try to discuss as much as we possibly can. The entries for that Breeders' Cup and post positions will be drawn on Monday, so we'll try to put something together after that. And Craig, do I understand it that you'll be at the Breeders' Cup this year?
Yes, me and my wife Elsie are heading out on Wednesday, and we'll be there both Friday and Saturday.
That's awesome. So Craig and I will try to get something out before then for all of you listeners, putting our Breeders' Cup opinions together. And we might be doing some videos. I haven't heard anything about that yet, but look out for that on DRF's YouTube channel coming up next week. Everybody, thanks for listening to this podcast. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Everybody, thanks for listening, and look out for that Breeders' Cup podcast coming up early next week.